There we go. Okay, so hi everyone. I thought I'd do like a quick live stream, or maybe it might not be so quick, but I thought it's like the last week before Christmas, and maybe there's a few things to sort of look at. Maybe I'm still on my older laptop, which I filmed my previous video on. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm not entirely sure. If you can hear me, just say. So I'm on this old laptop just because my other laptop, it got repaired and then it had the same issue again. So I'm back on this. And previously I was charging my camera and then I just didn't like it needed charging when I wanted to film anyway. So I'm using StreamYard again. I'll see how it is. Okay, so it looks like it is up, like it is processing at least. So I don't know if there's like any sort of real like updates of the fish. I've been testing out feeding continuously with the Biologist just so they constantly have food in the tank. So rather than using Rapashi for this or any other sort of traditional dry food, I'm using courgette just because it doesn't decay so quickly. And this is an attempt to maybe try and bulk them up for breeding, something like that. I'm not really tried it with Ancestors, and I'm not really entirely like, I might give it a go. So they're getting like just like as soon as they stop eating on it or it looks like it's running low, then I give them a bit more. So other things, it's just mostly just bulking up fishes. I do want to get a few more caves, but I'm leaving that till March because I've got the Catfish Study Group convention. Other things, obviously I need a few more plants in the aquariums. So I've done a few experiments with plants. So people that, I don't know if you can see that well on camera. So I have actually tried, so I usually try normal pothos. So I tried satin pothos and I just flung it in the tank. It's lost all its leaves. The roots aren't doing too badly, but they're starting to show root rot. So as I've concluded, terrestrial plants don't actually do that well in aquariums if you don't have that much nutrients, which I really don't. I might try just aerial roots of my monstera. So this is Monstera deliciosa. I don't believe in the sort of small and large morphs. Once this gets tall enough, I'll shove the aerial roots in the tank because it's got support from both sides. So they're the major updates, I think. For those that have not seen, so I'm just gonna try and get the thing on the mainstream on my computer if it loads, because this computer started to be really slow. It's not actually that old and it works just as well, I would say, as my other laptop, which is only like 2 years. But it's just a bit dire. And I'm not really a computery. Well, I can work computers because when you work in, if you do anything with biology or sciences in general, you have to deal with a lot of computers. So I generally deal with like a minor level of like coding, stuff like that, and modeling on the computer. So, but that's the extent of my like knowledge of computers. So I'll just say hello to everyone that's joined. So we've got freshwater naturalist, Daniel Groth. That's my dodgy pronunciation. I cannot pronounce anything that well. Pleco Fever, Christopher Arnesen, and Daniel Groth said hello. Well, not hello twice, but and then we got Rye. I believe that's how to pronounce it anyway. So there's a few things perhaps to maybe like I'd like to discuss today. So I'm kind of like between two jobs at the moment. So I finished my job working in education and now I'm going back into, because at the moment I'm in this period of applying for doctorates, PhDs, which is basically a period of waiting, it feels like. So, and then I'm good. So I finished my time teaching, if you get what I mean, and now I'm moving on to more sciencey style stuff because it just suits me. So I've got this now, I guess, experience in sort of teaching animal care, which is quite a different thing to how a lot of people would perceive it. So mostly I worked with exotics. That does include fishes, includes reptiles. So I'd say there's a lot of species that's changed my mind on. Obviously, big one is goats. I never want to deal with goats again. Rodents, I'm happy with dealing with guinea pigs. That's the extent of it. The others, I'm like, I don't want to get bitten. I've seen the damage. But a lot of exotics, I think I've got a lot more, like, I'm a lot more happy to deal with, say, snakes that are a lot more aggressive or a lot more temperamental. So I've worked now with a carpet python. It's a lot more tame than the previous one I've dealt with. But also because I've had to work with these animals, and maybe I'm not the most experienced with reptiles, I've shoved myself in I've shoved myself into loads of research on them. So I've mostly, because I do have a hognose snake, I've looked at a lot of it's not really live streams, podcasts and videos, and a lot of it's got me thinking on fishes. So especially UV with fishes, and I've been looking at a few papers, and to be honest, it's a bit of a minefield at the moment. Because UV, so when we look at UV, and it confuses students when I talk about this, because when I'm teaching animal care, I'm like, with reptiles, you've got UV and you need this UV and this UV, but ignore this UV. So with reptiles, you're always talking about UVA, UVB. With fishes, generally we talk about UVC. So it's really warm in here. This room is, all of these fish tanks are set to 28, 29 degrees. The Viv is set to 30, so it just boils in here. It's really good for the plants. So I've got a plant basically on my arm, and it's really annoying, but it's really warm. But with aquariums, we talk about UVC because obviously aquarium sterilizer, so those sterilizer units use UVC. That's the one that sterilizes, that kills a lot of bacteria more efficiently, I guess, or better than other UV. Other parts of the UV spectrum, so ultraviolet spectrum. So that's the thing that really it gets me interested, because obviously the sun is getting UV and some is penetrating the water, but to what extent, and is there any benefit? So there seems to be a benefit for plants and algae. For fishes, I'm not sure. The only issue is there negative for fishes? So, I need to charge my laptop. I should have put it on charge to begin with. That's my phone. Where's the charger? There. Okay, so for fishes, there seems to be a mild possible negative. So using UV could potentially cause, like it does in people, you might, if you stand in the sun too long, if you spend too long in the sun for long periods of time, over a long period of time, you're more likely to get cancerous growth, because it is it a form of radiation? I guess it is. So there is that potential risk, and I personally would not want to expose my fishes to it. But if there's a benefit of UV, maybe potentially offering it to them, but also offering maybe more places to hide, which comes into my video about flow rate. So offering maybe more decor, covering for Loricariidae. I think this is more specific for, because quite a few can be found in what's called clear water, not always black water, where there might be quite a lot of UV penetration. Loads of decor sort of at the top, and those are places to sort of hide in, that they can avoid the UV and travel around underneath that lighting. Obviously for blackwater fish it's a totally different thing. How much UV blackwater fish are getting is a totally different thing, because obviously blackwater, you've got such a high turbidity. So turbidity is sort of how much light can penetrate the water, or how far you can see into the water. So obviously it makes a big effect on how much you can actually, how much UV can actually penetrate the water. And it seems also, I would say, I don't know entirely whether salinity has an effect, or whether, because a lot of the studies are looking at marine, and you'll find that all the time, sadly. So whether salinity has much effect, and I don't think it would, but there's quite a few studies that have said that salinity, salt water has a high UV penetration, and this is probably largely suggests due to that freshwater tends to have a lot more tannins, stuff like that in the water. And if you can hear a tapping, that's because over there I've got my big Baroncistrus Chrysolamus female is eating courgette, and it's on a spoon and it taps the glass, which I don't really like. It makes me worry about things cracking or whatever. But yeah, she's eating on that, and it just ends up hitting against the glass, because I tend to put it at the front where I can see her, although she's quite shy, and I find that with fish, but I'm not too worried if she is shy. It's a good sign that she's active, moving around. So I think UV is something that we've yet to really look at. We probably should do. One person has said, one person I saw on one of these reptile podcasts mentioned that UV could be beneficial. It's kind of thinking it as like energy, and energy is transferred not just through food, is also lighting, heat. Obviously fishes, a lot of their heat will just come from that the heat of the water, but how far is that entirely penetrating the fish? So while it's kind of like a lot of marine places look up to a lot of reptiles keepers look up to freshwater, marine, or just aquariums in general for ecosystems, but whether that's actually reflected entirely in because obviously to maintain an aquarium you have to have an ecosystem. Whether we are actually keeping up to date with maintaining the care to how the fish might be in the wild is another thing, because obviously you got bioactive in reptiles, and that's not the end all be all from my understanding. But in fishes, you have to have that. In freshwater ecosystems, the actual bioactive element is so much different. You got the outflow of the water, the inflow sort of thing, and that will sort of maintain waste levels. So it's not so much of like a lake or a marine ecosystem where you get a lot more interactions with nutrients so much. Obviously it depends on pollution as well. So just reading a few comments because I've got three. Thank you, Rai. So I am active on Facebook a lot, and I don't know if I plan making. So it blocks out half my face, the comments in there. So I don't know whether I plan making a video on Facebook versus YouTube, because I really value Facebook so much for information. Just because Facebook, you get a lot more opinions, and you can't really see someone's fish tanks, or you can't really see how many fish tanks someone's got. So you can't really equate on Facebook like what fish people have or how many fish tanks people have to what information they can provide. So that's why I kind of value Facebook maybe a little bit more. Also, you get a lot more contrasting opinions, and that can be kind of interesting but stressful at the same time, especially if you're new. If you're new, I think that's really difficult. So a lot of people could tend to swarm to YouTube, and obviously it's something to last on YouTube. I did see something recently where someone posted something and they got loads of attacks. I never actually saw the post, I saw the response. So I don't know if it's this kind of anonymity as a person on Facebook, whereas a YouTuber, you have no anonymity at all, really. You can't escape it. The commenters obviously do, so it's kind of like, but then you can kind of avoid. You cannot, like, YouTubers cannot mention things, but they can't be escaped from it, whereas commenters can. YouTubers can hide comments and stuff, so I guess that's another thing. So we got Fish EZ here, and then we got Rene, Fabian, what's it, Pinalosa Mota from Peru. And of course we got Macaulay. And yeah, I know all your fish have UV, and it's really got me thinking. I do really want to give it a go. I'm thinking about the logistics of it actually, because where I live in rented accommodation, I can, to a degree, sort of put hooks up and stuff. Firstly, I'd have to fill it out when I move out of the house. And also, well, it's more how I put it over the aquarium, because a lot of UVs are designed for marine. For reptiles. So they're designed for reptile type lid, and I assume most either are designed for the wooden vivariums or the the glass exoterra style vivarium. So putting it over a fish tank might be a challenge, but I'd like to give it a go, and I am really tempted. It's what strength of UV has really got me like confused. I don't know whether to try maybe a shade dweller, which is for very low strength and a short sort of area. And it's really confusing, because in fish you're working with scientific papers. Obviously, like Arcadia's got so much on their website, but it's all designed for reptiles. So it's very much like, what do I use? It's also quite expensive, I guess. But I have got Arcadia lighting fittings for I've got one spare, so I can fit T8 reptile lighting, reptile UVs onto at least one fish tank and kind of somehow fit it in. The only risk is generally I end up putting the bulb balancing on the what's the thing called? The plastic bit between the two sides of the aquarium. And I just worry that that's gonna sort of heat it up too much. So I might try that. And I don't know about LEDs. There's a lot of debate on LEDs for UV lighting on aquariums. Some people say they're not strong enough, and some people say they're good. So I'm like, I don't know what really. And I guess that really comes into doing more research and maybe just exploring all the reptile websites, or more Facebook, I think. So like Advancing Herpetological Husbandry, I think it is. So I need to cough. I've got a bit of a cold, I think. I don't know. Really, it's not COVID. I test every day. So 20 gallon, trying to reach 85 degrees. I assume that's Fahrenheit, because Celsius, that would be boiling a tank. 200 watt heater. I would say, so 20 gallons, that'd be about 100 litres. I would say you could go with a 100 watt easily. 200 watt could work, and I wouldn't be opposed to saying that it would work because so I would say 100 watt would work. 80 litres. So yeah, you could go with 100 watt. Bear in mind it will be on longer, if you get what I mean. So it'll be heating up for longer to reach that desired temperature. But then the only issue of the 200 watt is it might be switching on and off more, so it might blow quicker in theory. That's just an idea. So on this one, I've got 150 watts. It is 200 litre. It says it's because my 200 watt, so it's 200 litre. The 200 or 300 watt heater blew. Well, it didn't blow. It went up to 45 degrees and heated up the tank too high. So it does go on for a long time. It's about, well, my Inkbird is saying about 15 hours, 20 hours to heat up the whole tank. Whereas if you use the 200 watt, it wouldn't take so long. Like that tank will take like just overnight to heat up from a 50% water change. So it really depends on which your it's sort of a hit and miss situation with heaters. Heaters absolutely drive me nuts. So I've got an Inkbird on mine because after that accident, it really helps, and I can keep an eye on it on my phone. Also, it helps you check if there's power cut in the house because it won't get signal. Oh, then we got sodas for quartz. I've never tried any of that, like because these are just, I'm a bit cheapskate when it comes to actual aquarium. So I've still got the original, plastic things. These are, God knows why so many brands, why Jewel and Fluval switch to these things, because you lift them up. Firstly, they don't actually hinge. So they end up falling in the tank. And then they just bend and they're just pointless. I'd rather them have used maybe the old style, which worked better. These are just, you might as well just use any old sheet. So I'm still keeping what I've always had. But I might try something like that just to put on top. 12% is a good sort of, I guess, a starting point. I can never remember what I've used for a lot of. I know for the reptiles, it was like 45% for the eumastics that was recommended, but that was the only one I ever needed to replace because the eumastics one went down from I think it went down from about 7 to about 3 in about a week. Solar meter, and I was like, needs replacing. So eumastics is a type of reptile. They need quite high temperatures, quite high UV. Since work with them, I did experiment with other aspects. So like dew in the morning, so I sprayed it. Although the eumastics are the grumpiest reptile I've dealt with. The shade dweller's not cutting it. Probably wouldn't. They are really low from my understanding. Yeah, I need to really research, and I do plan on going to the reptile store sometime soon because I got my car back, so I can actually get there. Because there's so much stuff I actually need. I'm wanting to redo the hognose viv, and I'll probably film that. I might not, because I won't be replacing it right now, but definitely does need to replace it at some point because the wood has expanded slightly because I'm doing kind of more naturalistic, and I guess where it's kind of more humid at the bottom and I never actually sealed it with silicone, it's actually expanded, and at different ends you can see the wood's kind of peeling. It is an old viv. It's secondhand when I got it, and it was cheap, so it doesn't bother me too much. but it's causing a bit of issues. And I don't really want to make an entire reptile channel. I've only got a hog nose, so I can't exactly do a reptile channel, but maybe just showing off the Viv. It's not the most interesting anyway. So yeah, just it's kind of like it's experimenting with different things, and I think both hobbies, reptiles and fishes, have a lot to offer each other that we don't actually entirely sort of communicate each other. I guess sometimes there's a bit of snobbery between either, that one's more difficult than the other, or there is this perception, because when I worked with reptiles and fishes in a store, people be like, oh, fish, we go fish first, then we go for the reptiles. It's like, okay. Probably like they don't really compare. And it's kind of, I guess it's totally different size of the same hobby, but different, because it's all pet care in the end. And yeah, because also the way we talk about wild caught and the aquarium hobby is very different to how we talk about it in or how people talk about it in reptiles, because I can't really say I'm in the reptile hobby entirely. So heating aquariums with basking lamps. Never tried that. The closest I've seen is heat mats without a thermostat for aquariums. But it would be interesting to try a basking lamp, especially maybe for slow flow fishes, stuff like gouramis, betta, stuff like that, where the water, like, it sits for a bit more. Although I don't know whether having that gradient in water temperature is that good of an idea, because in nature, that gradient is probably going to be a lot deeper down before they feel any sort of drop in temperature. But it would be an interesting idea, and also seeing whether they find a preference to being in areas of higher light. Saying that, those sort of fishes that live in those areas, if you look at like banks and stuff, there's loads of plants. I just close the can't because it makes it look like my little head's like pointing above it. You see like areas of bright light and areas of lower light. So I don't know if that would be beneficial. I think it would be. Because there's going to be areas maybe a little bit higher temperature. It depends on the flow. So that's why I say lower flow aquariums, because high flow is just going to be moving quite quickly, rather than a sort of low flow aquarium. A low flow environment, so rice paddies, sort of lakes that don't really move much, very sort of slow flow areas of a river. You might get that actual gradient in, like, say, the Rio Zingu. You're probably not going to get it entirely. But basking lamps is a really interesting idea to actually try. And I've never actually really looked into it or given it a go. And I can't really think of any negatives, but like UV, obviously, you've got the risk of radiation. Well, not radiation, but potential issues with UV itself on the fish. Could be radiation, but yeah, so it's worth actually like looking into as a contrast, because it's always worth trialing different things, especially if you got like loads of fish tanks. So I might try. I'm probably definitely going to try UV on the Baron Sisters Chrysolamus tank, because I have got they're found in sort of the Rio Zingu, where the water's quite clear-ish. There's loads of sediment, but not loads like black water. And there's loads of algae, and I'm hoping it'll promote it. And I wonder whether half the issue we've had with quite a few, like maybe why we don't see so many different types of algae is due to lighting. And a lot of people say with plant lights, but plant lights only provide like color spectrum, to be honest. So I don't know if there's as much value in them. So what insects would Loricariidae, plecos eat in the wild? So it's a real mixture. So I'd probably say more invertebrates. So invertebrates are things without a vertebrae, and ignoring actually. So what would they eat? Insects especially would be insect larvae. So that'd be like, I think it's chromatid. So that's like bloodworm style stuff. Bloodworm type larvae, so midge larvae. Bloodworm don't have a larvae, so bloodworm is the larvae, so it's a midge larvae. Other sort of invertebrate larvae, insect larvae. Other invertebrates, though, would be stuff like annelids, so very small annelids, maybe even nematodes. Those are kind of feeding on decaying material. So you could feed earthworms, chopped earthworms, especially the smaller ones would be a lot easier for other species. Brine shrimp is good if you could get it to sink, hence why frozen. Daphnia is also if frozen. Tubifex is good, that's an annelid worm, that's very easy to digest. And it's not as like dirty as perhaps in the past people thought it was. I've always fed rotifers. So rotifers are one when you go into the store, they're all marketed at marine. The frozen ones can be fed in both. I don't know if the frozen ones actually are cultured in marine or freshwater, but there's something different to feed. Other things would be like bryozoa. So I'm kind of verging in beyond animals, so stuff like protozoa. So there's a whole range of different taxa. Taxa being groups of animals, plants, whatever, of microbial life. But the actual, like, how you'd split it would depend on the species, the genera, stuff like that. So say, so a lot of, sorry, so a lot of fishes will sort of narrow their niche into certain aspects of that microbial life. So some will feed more on the algae, whereas some will feed more on that insect larvae, mollusks, stuff like that. So it really depends on which taxa you're actually talking about. So when it comes to insects, I'd say if you're keeping Scopian ancestors, Pseudocanthicus, Leprocanthicus, those really true carnivores. Also, out of Loricariidae, you got like maybe not entirely considered plecos, I guess, by the common name. Pseudohemiodon, Planilocauria. They feed a lot on insect larvae, also mollusks, stuff like that. So just be a diversity, and that's why I'd feed them in captivity, because you're never going to be able to replicate those actual species they're feeding on. And kind of when it comes to other taxa, so say Picoltia or Pecatia, however you want to say it, and Cistrus, Hypancistrus, what was it, Panacus, whatever. They might be feeding on more of the microscopic life, so bryozoa, protozoa. So not actually insects themselves. And we don't have to entirely look at insects. Because insects, when it comes to freshwater life, so where Loricariidae plex come from, it generally is restricted to the larvae. Obviously, you've got like diving beetles and that lot. So generally thinking about that, really. So I think that's a good answer for that question. So in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, if not, I might talk a little bit about how we really talk about fish keeping in general when it comes to education, because I think a lot of us maybe we don't entirely see how education and stuff happens when it comes to fish keeping in general is a lot more difficult than a lot of people perceive. So most people aren't even educated with it, and I don't think I know of any colleges down south anymore that actually teach fish keeping. Some do have aquariums as part of their animal management, and it's not a bad idea. But my issue was where you have such a limited time to talk about fish. And the problem is with fish is that they're quite complex. With reptiles, you're dealing with quite a few species, but in fishes, you're dealing with thousands. So it was recorded around, I think it's 5,000 species of freshwater fishes, 1,000 species of marine fishes. And if you could say you could do teaching, was it 5 weeks, 3 weeks, about fishes, just in, so it's not even like a full week. It's impossible. It is science. As this comment says. So it makes it so difficult to actually teach, and it kind of gets lumped into this basic animal care. You don't need to think much about it. It's all about other animals, and especially when it comes to freshwater. And a lot of people forget about, like, a lot of people aren't aware of the nitrogen cycle, and that's so basic when it comes to even science, let alone learning fish keeping. But there's just so few courses. A lot of people did study the original, like at Sparshock, they did do a fish keeping like BTEC, which is sixth form college study. So that's 16 to 18. And that's now, they no longer teach that. I don't think they even have their ornamental aquatics area. So I guess they must have lumped a load of fish in with exotics. I don't know. But it does make you wonder whether, I don't know if fish are not seen as valued as much. Because in theory, if you want to work, say, with reptiles, you might end up working with fishes as well. If you want to work with exotics, it's just so important in general to know about fishes because there's that whole ecosystem. They're not easy to learn about. You're not just learning about that nitrogen cycle. You've got to realistically, if you want to work with fishes, you need to learn about phosphates, you need to learn about silicates. Lighting is beneficial if you want to deal with plants, which you can avoid, I guess, because I've managed to avoid doing much with plants. Saying that, I've got loads of terrestrial plants, so I understand how plants function. And it just seems like there's this maybe void of knowing about fishes. And maybe people aren't interested. When it came to fishes, I got a lot of blank faces. And I don't know if I'll discuss it properly at all. Other things, like when it comes to university level, so as far as I know, there is no ichthyology, which is study of fishes, courses in the UK. There is marine biology, and there is a freshwater marine biology degree. I think Hull offers it. The only issue is marine biology and freshwater biology does not mean you know about fishes. So you can say that, like I study marine biology, but you might be studying worms. You might be studying the chemistry of the oceans. You might be studying how upwellings work and how it influences, like, say, phytoplankton. So I constantly had it when I worked in the aquarium industry. So in stores, people would come up to me and say, my cousin, my brother, my friend is a marine biologist, or they study marine biology, and they said this. I'm like, I knew a marine biologist that couldn't name one species of shark. So it's like there seems to be this void with, especially where it comes to a lot of people that do, like, say, herpetology or other aspects of animal care. When they do it at degree level, they really are interested and they know, they like actually have that extended interest and know what they're talking about. And it just drove me nuts, especially when it came to fresh water. It was like, this person's a marine biologist, so they know what they know about freshwater. I'm like, yeah, but freshwater works in different ways to marine. Like, I could tell you about how rivers and lakes function, but the marine ecosystem, it's kind of different. So it's just really painful, and there is this big void. I think, especially, I think it's generally seeing fishes as lesser, and I did a whole slide saying fishes are equally as intelligent as other vertebrates, because you get vertebrates that aren't very intelligent. Say certain, even mammals, other, I can't specifically state others, but you get ones that are equal, that are very intelligent. And one of, because I like to say things that if people have something really good as evidence to say against. So my example of a very intelligent fish is Gnathostomus? Gnathonemus petersi, which is Peter's elephant nose, which has, as far as I'm aware, the largest brain to body ratio. So that's an extremely, possibly smart fish. Only possibly. So, and yet so many people think fish is less intelligent, so they don't see them as something to care about entirely. And even guppies are seen as reasonably smart. Of course, it depends on the environment and what they're dealing with. We can't really entirely understand their entire world because they have different sensory systems. As I explained to people, they've gone down a different evolutionary path. Just because they haven't got the same as us, it doesn't mean theirs is better than ours or ours is better than theirs. So, and also, is stating that marine is equally as intelligent, difficult, challenging, complex as freshwater, especially when it comes to rivers and lakes. The complexity of those systems is insane. Like, you have entire papers just on Loch Ness or Lake Windermere. Those are two of the best studied lakes in the UK, I think. There's plenty on American lakes and other European lakes. I assume in England you've got, like, obviously, now I've totally forgotten the name of the river, but chalk streams, they're probably very well studied because they're very well protected. So there is that, and I think people just aren't interested in studying fishes, even if they don't realise how threatened, especially freshwater fishes are. Because you hear a lot about corals, but you never hear about freshwater fishes. Yeah, and I think this is really important. People use fishes as decoration. Aquariums are meant to be this beautiful thing that you have in your house. And I don't think they entirely are that, like, because the realism is, when it comes to it, there's a lot of pests that come with the tank. These are natural sort of things that would occur in an ecosystem: algae, bacteria, like snails, hydra to an extent. And a lot of people just look at these, like, at fish tanks, just to be decoration. And that's probably where the stalling in knowledge occurs. A lot of people, they get an aquarium, it's successful, so they just leave it at that. They don't look to improve. And you see it even on Facebook, a lot of people, they don't go into maybe looking at something else, updating their knowledge. Because a lot of people will have fish tanks, say, like 10 years ago, and then they think they know what they're doing now, or they've had fish 50 years and they think they know, or they think it's exactly the same as it was back then. Of course, technology's changed, because if you look at some of these old style heaters, filters, like when under gravel was all the rage, and that's practically all you had apart from sponge filters. And I think even now we look at things we had now and be like, oh, blimey, even in like 10 years, like, why have we used that? And some things do last, like Eheim external filters, they last, like, people are still using theirs from decades ago. And I understand when people are using things for breeding or sales, it's an entirely different thing to as if you're keeping it for the benefit of the fish, the longevity. But I think that should be stated, especially. But decoration is the big thing. And a lot of people want these impressive fishes but aren't willing to look after them. And you need to be a hobbyist to look after some. And I know a lot of people say discus are easy and stuff like that, but I still think you need that level of research and dedication to keep fish like that. And puffers, Loricariidae certainly, so plex. A lot of fishes actually, because there's so much you can miss if you don't go into those details. And being an actual hobbyist, I did see a post actually on a Facebook group where someone said, is fish keeping a hobby, or do you do you see fish keeping as like caring for the animals if a pet? So if the animal dies, do you see it as like, say, if your if your painting fell apart, which is I guess a hobby, or someone kicked a painting, opposed to if the dog died. And maybe I think the difference is if you're seeing the animal as something you value and care about, opposed to also maybe additionally looking into the details and caring for the animal, which I think you can do both, because a lot of people might only have 1 or 2 tanks, which is fine. I think there's so much promotion on having loads of tanks, when I think having a few is fine, it's great, and there should be no negatives behind it. Putting as much value on those few tanks, and also doing additional research and putting in effort, like people with massive book collections, keeping up with their research. So yeah, especially people with loads of tanks. Like, it's great if you can have loads of tanks, but not everyone can. And there's still as much value to only having 1 or 2. Especially on YouTube, we see it consistently where people have so many tanks. And then there's a few people with maybe 1 or 2. Especially if you don't have monster fish. If you've got like large predatory fish and you have like 1 tank, it's obviously a lot of people look at it and think, oh wow, that's amazing, opposed to having maybe fish that have seen the less, especially if you had like, you're really interested in live bearers, so you just had a tank with live bearers. And it's fine if you're interested in guppies and stuff like that. There's loads of interesting stuff actually about guppies and the science, their biology and stuff like that. So yeah, puffers, South American cichlids and plecos. So puffers, I'm half debating whether half it's very food motivated, which obviously a lot of intelligent behaviour is. So I mean, half of their interactive behaviour that people perceive as intelligent is basically stomach love, as you'd say with like dogs and stuff like that. So it's really difficult to say, and they do have those faces that look at you and you think, that is such an intelligent fish. It's looking at me with these 2 big googly eyes and it's following me around. But a lot of animals do follow around, and sometimes it's just to follow food, and it's so difficult to work out. It's like splitting the thing between splitting it between sort of food motivated, maybe learning, and actually working out things for yourself, maybe. So cichlids, I definitely think, have a level of intelligence that a lot of animals don't have. So discus fishes, I think, because they got that sociality. Discus fishes, there is a really interesting PhD thesis that if people are interested, I could find and maybe put the link in the comments if people really ask for it. But it shows how they actually show very similar like breeding behavior to mammals. Especially they do produce milk, although it's more, I guess it's the slime coat, which mammals do. Mammals produce milk from mammary glands, whether it's like, I think, is it echidnas? and platypus, where it's not actually from teats, but it's very similar behaviour. They show this very strong parental bond. Not really bond, but they raise the fry, and a lot of cichlids show this. Whether it's difficult to say whether it's intelligence entirely, because obviously you get other animals that do it, other mammals that do similar. Sorry, not other mammals, but mammals that do similar. But whether it means they're intelligent or not is another thing. And it really depends. Plecos, I am not entirely sure about their intelligence. Other catfishes, I've heard jelly bean catfish, I cannot give their scientific name off the top of my head, but they're meant to be quite smart, and I've read quite a few articles where it really shows off their intelligence. But I think when it comes to intelligence, I really look at the knife fishes. So that's gymnotiforms, Memoridae. Memorids are like relatives, because you got like Notopteridae. So that includes what's it? Xeno. I've forgotten now. The African knife fish. Those lot. Those electric knife fish, especially, they communicate with electricity rather than sound. I'd assume maybe sound isn't so great in their environment, hence why so many freshwater fish have gone for other techniques to communicate. Opposed to marine, because marine has been proven that you've got like almost a morning chorus and so many different sounds. Maybe just fishes haven't evolved that, and so they use other techniques to get around that, because you see it so often. But usually if you're trying to get to a point of evolution, you get some convergence. So anyway, I'll probably, rather than sort of ramble on a bit, I'll probably end this live stream now. If you have any comments, put it in the comment section when it loads. And thank you for watching. I'll probably do a video. I meant to actually post it today, but I forgot. Partially I needed to actually write a script. But I wanted to write a video on the common name pleco, really sort of go into where it originates and what it applies to, and stuff like that. Anyway, thank you for watching, and goodbye.